Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sarah Traver, I'm the director here at Traver Gallery, and I am very pleased to be here with our featured artist, Lauren Grossman, and Bill Traver, the founder of the gallery. We're here today to walk through Lauren's current exhibition titled Pillar of Salt, A Glance Back. And this is a really special exhibition for us because it represents over 30 years of work.
35? Yeah,
35 years of work. And it's not typical that we do retrospective exhibitions. I mean, the context of a gallery is always that the work is for sale. And so oftentimes retrospective exhibitions happen in museums and things. But in this case, we were able to work with Lauren to go back through her archives in her studio and pull together a really beautiful collection of work, starting from really early pieces to absolutely recent pieces. So we'll walk through the exhibition with Lauren, talk about the work, and learn about the inspiration and the materials, and go from there. Lauren, can you maybe start by just talking a little bit about the title, because the title has a lot to do with a lot of the subject matter, and...
It does. I stole the title, obviously, from the story of Lot's wife, where they're fleeing out of Gomorrah and they're turned back, and she's told by the angel of God not to turn back or you'll turn into a pillar of salt. But she just can't help herself. She's left a couple children behind. There's some serious reasons to turn back and have a look, and that one glance just was it. She turned into a pillar of salt for history and on and on. So it's about kind of the perils of looking back, of resting on your laurels a little bit, of looking back to see what you might find in what you haven't looked at in a long time. And that goes straight to pieces like Susanna and the Elders here that I made in my 20s. And I haven't seen this piece put together in 30 years or so. So it's a very interesting process to actually dig out and clean the stains off things and dust them and see what they mean 35 years later. It's a fascinating process. And I won't tell stories about each of the pieces, but the earlier work is pretty recognizable because it's this polychrome painted ceramics, and it was very much about my version of retelling biblical stories and what they meant to my life at that time. And now I look back and I think, well, it still works, but it's what it meant to that 20-something. It's a very different story than I would tell now. And I'm thinking I might actually try to rework some of these stories as a 60-something-year-old and see what parts of it are interesting. So it's kind of sparked some potential future work to do this process.
Yeah.
Actually, I would like to be just interlude here for a moment, because speaking of looking back, I just had a few questions I wanted to ask you a little bit about your history and your family's history.
Right.
You came from a family of artists.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your dad, for example?
My dad. There's a complicated topic. My dad was a nice Jewish boy from Detroit who married a nice Shiksa Presbyterian woman, also from Detroit. And we were raised in a family of two artist parents, both of them art educators, and kind of raised to look at the complexity, the cultural complexity of the world around us. So we often went into churches that we didn't really belong to, and we became kind of, not really cultural voyeurs, but interested scholars of the broad range of what the world has to offer.
And when did you first start making art? Would you seriously?
As soon as I stopped eating the art materials, I think I started making art. Yeah, I mean, I probably ate a lot of clay as a kid, but apparently it's also used as a medicine in Mexico as kaopectate, because kaolin, kaopectate, basically kaopectate was clay to stop diarrhea in children. So I probably didn't have diarrhea a lot.
Self-medicating.
But yeah, I was always given art supplies to entertain myself. And I would say that my dad was my muse for years, because I would just make this stuff and bring it to him.
I remember that, and when your dad would come to the gallery, your early shows at the gallery in Belltown, I had an opportunity to meet your dad, and he was always very curious and very supportive of you and what you were doing,
Yeah.
the work you were doing. When,
Oh, he was always my biggest fan. And
Right.
he had the most embarrassing collection of things in the house. If you ever went to the old family house, he would start pulling out the stuff.
Mhm.
And for, you know, during my teen years and early college, I would just wince. But eventually, you know, that's okay.
Mhm.
I made some pretty interesting stuff when I was a little kid.
Right.
Uh,
So, and when, did you have a formal education in art?
I did. I went off for a couple years to Washington U, St. Louis, and studied a lot of silversmithing and small metals.
Mm-hmm.
And then decided that I really wanted to switch to ceramics, which I was going to do over my dead body because my father taught ceramics. But it's funny how that comes and loops around again.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Funny.
yeah, I came up to the UW to finish out ceramics with Howard Kotler and Patty Warsheen and Bob
And what
Sperry.
year would that have been?
That was, I moved to Seattle in 1981, I think. Yes, 81.
And your first show with the gallery was 82?
I first had pieces in the gallery. Your old partner, Iris Sutton, came over and saw me working on something. She had come to see my roommate, who was altering clothes for her.
Mm-hmm.
And Iris came in, and I was covered with clay, and she said, "What do you do?" So I was showing her, and then I think I had first pieces in your gallery, maybe 84?
1984.
And 87 was the first solo show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh. And I recall, and you had quite a following from the university and from other clay people. Seattle was known for its clay, and the University of Washington
Right.
was highly known for their department in clay, right?
Right. It had a very good reputation for
Nationally
figurative
or
and
internationally.
yeah.
Mhm.
Especially for sort of things with kind of difficult content, figurative things, sculpture. Clay used as something other than pots was its strong suit. Although, you know, Bob Sperry was a fabulous potter, but he also had surface pieces that were about other things.
Mhm.
So if you got a degree in ceramics, it didn't mean you had to work in ceramics. I started doing, this is old house paints and oil enamels on the surface of this. There is some glaze. So I used glaze where I needed glaze, and I used paint where I preferred paint. So I basically made these pieces as canvases to paint on, because you can see that the surfaces are pretty complicated. They have the same depth as if I had been doing an oil painting.
Yeah.
So I didn't find, you know, the rules of ceramics to be inhibiting.
Right.
And that's really carried through your work
Right.
over time. I mean, the use of materials has been something that a lot of people have commented on in seeing this exhibition, because there's so many materials represented. Maybe we can walk through a little bit and take a look at some of the other pieces.
I think the biggest shift for me for change in materials was when I got a residency at Kohler to work in their iron foundry. So the jump from ceramics to cast iron over here, that was a big seminal shift for me.
Mm-hmm.
I learned at that point that what I really wanted to do was, every time I changed materials, I would start again. I have a habit of getting really good at things, and when I'm too good at something, it makes me really suspicious. So what I really wanted to do is, throughout my career, I've tried things that I don't know how to do, to see what they'll do, and it does my thinking a lot of good to be a beginner again. So it gives you a chance to start over. I knew that with the cast iron, I couldn't be as detailed and delicate and controlling as I was with clay by the time I was done with clay.
Yeah.
And
What year was that first residency at Kohler?
1990.
1990, wow.
And that was a complete aesthetic shift. I totally fell in love with the industrial aesthetic of being in a factory. And, you know, I was working in a studio with big conveyor belts of bathtubs, just basically
Yeah.
clanking and swinging by, and the scale of things was huge. I mean, I grew up in Tucson. I never saw kind of a Midwestern factory before, and it was so beautiful and so ugly and dirty and, you know, horrible
Yeah.
to work in at the same time. It was complicated, but I think that residency was probably the end of my desire to tell stories in a really kind of controlled narrative fashion, and it made it move into more of a industrial multiples, making molds, making more than one of something, and seeing what a series will do. So it was a real shift, and I was 30 at that point.
So this piece over here, this cast iron piece, is this from Kohler, this one?
This is from Kohler the first time, and that's from Kohler the first time. This is Weeping Eve, and the importance of that piece to me is it was the first time I ever used text on a piece. And this was 1990, and it took me 10 years to use text again. But you just never know as you're working. I mean, I was thinking of what the biblical text of Adam and Eve and that kind of cursing of Adam and Eve as they leave Eden was about. And the burden on Eve is this kind of set of rules. You can't read that text, but it reads as text. So I wasn't using really specific text at that point. So I completely buried this piece in about an inch of enamel and then sandblasted back to the text that was risen on the surface, which is why I like surfaces that are kind of beaten up and abused. And they all look like they've been worn and used for centuries. So things that are kind of cracked and broken are interesting to me.
Yeah.
And texts are the same thing, especially the old biblical texts. They're just fragments that have been edited in and out over the millennia.
What about the reference to the Bible in your work? I mean, that is a theme that carries through so strongly throughout the pieces that are in this exhibition. I mean, here with the Ascension.
It's one of those things that it's kind of a hook that interests me as a guideline for how to make work. If you're an artist, you can make work about absolutely anything. And that's just too big. Absolutely anything is giant. So to me, it helps pare down my thinking and sort of delve into some scholarship around it and work within parameters. So it's my own set of rules that I find interesting. And I often step outside it, make things that have no biblical content. But it's been an interesting place to be for decades. And it's an interesting place for humans to be too. I think the way religions are structured and used is fascinating, endlessly.
Yeah.
And the reason I picked the Bible is because that's my, being half Jewish and half Presbyterian, that's supposedly my legacy. And I didn't grow up with that. I didn't grow up with religious teaching. So it was something I had to learn. In order to read Ulysses, you need to know the Bible. In order to look at paintings in most of Western culture, you need to know the Bible. And it could be the Old Testament or the Tanakh, or it could be the New Testament. I use King James because I just love the language. And it's the one I grew up looking at when I was a kid, at my mother's Bible. My father didn't have a Tanakh around the house, so I didn't.
So this piece is also interactive in that you can manipulate it.
You can. You want to go up or down?
Oh, I'm going to go up.
Okay, but I can't tell you which way that is.
That's down. So a number of your works are interactive.
Yeah, and to me that's kind of the place where I allow the audience lots of room. Like, is this an act of faith, an act of curiosity? What am I doing here? Why am I taking these feet? And ostensibly the crossing makes them the feet of Christ. And the miracle in the Ascension is when those feet actually just leave the ground. I mean, those feet on the ground are nothing special, but those feet lifting. So I tried to edit things down to kind of a moment, the moment that that story takes its power. And then you end up with a very visually kind of succinct telling. Instead of worrying about who's standing around and what's going on, why is he ascending, I've got it down to that little lift, that little moment where, and you make it happen. I mean, if people don't believe in these things or these stories, they don't exist.
Yeah.
So the
another interactive piece here.
Right. And this is a piece that really hones in on that level of repetition, because that is called Wife, and it is Lot's wife. And you turn her into a pillar of salt very slowly. You make that happen. And that repeating of turning and turning and turning. In the story, it happens once.
I'm just going to do this.
Go for it. Yeah, in the story, it happens once, but here it's available for continuous thinking and contemplating. And the whole, most world religions have some sort of sacred circumambulation. So this also refers outside of Western religion. It refers to larger and broader.
Right, like ascending
customs.
a Buddhist temple or.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or walking around the Kaaba, or, yeah. It's a thing, it's a ritual thing.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I love also about your work is your titles. There's a poetry in the titles that allows it to, like a piece like this so clearly references this biblical story, but its succinct title, just Wife, allows for there to be this sort of other interpretation of what this piece is about, and it makes it very relevant to contemporary life in a way.
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of people who don't know that your work carries these biblical references can approach this piece and have a very different understanding of what that meaning is.
Right, in this case,
Wife as a
literally,
salt grinder.
Wife as a grind.
Wife as a grind. Wife who
Yeah.
is, you know, here she is stationary.
Right. And
She's
she's
immobile
just
and
being
she's
ground to a fine powder.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff that I like to leave open.
Yeah.
And you can come into my shows not knowing anything about the stories, but you can probably sense there's a story back there. But I hope, in the best of possible art making success, is that it's satisfying without the story and gets better if you know more.
And there's also this bit of humor too that can be.
Yeah. Well, much like Wife being a grind, this is the Tower of Babel, and it's called Babel Toy. So, and ultimately, at the end of the story of the Tower of Babel, God comes down and is a little freaked out that the humans are collaborating and they're building a tower unto heaven. Well, in this case, this kind of a you be God situation. Only the story's been so often repeated, every time it starts anew, the tower's standing back up again. So this is kind of a self-correcting Tower of Babel.
And here again, you've got the use of text. In some cases, the text is quite explicit in the work. Is this text here is this biblical text in this piece? Or?
Yeah, this is actually, some of the pieces that are made up of text like that tend to be made up of their own description. So this is the story of the Tower of Babel in that text. I don't care if you can read it or not. It's in there for me, and it's in there to imply that it's there. But it's its own story being told. The first time I did that was in the two tongues that are back there that are text. And that's when the Holy Ghost descended on the apostles and gave them the ability to speak. It's kind of a contradiction to the Babel story, which God wants to break up people's ability to communicate and work together. In the Acts of the Apostles, he wants them to speak all tongues to everybody. So it's one of, the Bible and probably all religious texts are complicated messes if you look at the details. And I really like the complicated mess that has, is sacred to some, is literature to others, but is undyingly interesting to me. So that's where I choose to work.
Talk a little bit about this piece. This is such a beautiful piece. I love the way it just sits there
I love the way it just sits there. I like that.
Yeah.
I did a whole series of these cast iron birds. This was my second trip to Kohler, so I had access to iron and also to enamel, which is not, cast iron and enamel is not something that you can do at home. So this is based on the Song of Songs, which is, or the Song of Solomon. They use both names. It's a long kind of love poem, and it's actually really kind of sweet and treacly. For the Bible, it's just, it's, you know, it's about love, and they say it's about, you know, the relationship between the people in Israel, but it's not really. It's pretty lewd, and it's often used in weddings. So I just wanted to see what I could do with a very sweet text. And each of these birds in the series, there were 8 of them, I think, they had a chunk of that text that I picked out because it stood out to me. This particular one is Little Foxes, and it's actually kind of a sneaky night text. So it ended up with a silk kind of negligee lining. So, you know, it's not quite so literal how these things got their various variations, but that's for my amusement.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really like the delicacy of the silk against the weight of the iron. And that goes back to my material amusements. And I also made a lot of fragile cast iron, which is a contradiction in terms.
How about this piece here, Lauren? This is an interesting one. Folks have had a lot of questions about. It's titled Capture.
It's a device that can capture your last breath. There's a lot of focusing on last breaths being the way that people die in the Bible and how it's written poetically. So I had to deal with some last breath of people that I knew and loved, and was thinking a lot about what that is. Like, what is your last gasp? And what does that mean? So this is a kind of a capture device for it. So just in case you wanted to know what that last breath was, you could put this in. But by the time, it does fit me, and it's incredibly uncomfortable to wear. The sort of helmet device comes off. And you can put one little glass capture piece in each of the orifices, and this goes in your mouth. But if you wear it long enough, it would kill you.
Right.
So if you obsess about what the end is, it would kill you. But mostly I just like the sort of look of glass, and glass being frozen breath. Because that's kind of what it is. And that's one of those things. I'm not a very good glass blower, but I liked the sort of lumpen quality of this is of hand-blown bad glass. I mean, it won't fall apart. It's properly annealed and all, but I'm not good at it. And that was interesting to me. It's like, what can I make this do?
Yeah.
A lot of the other bubbles you see around are blown by professionals, way beyond my skill set.
Yeah. There's a few pieces in the exhibition that have the potential to include fire. Can you talk a little bit about those works? And unfortunately, we can't light them in here because we have a, contemporary fire suppression system in this building, and they would not like it if we set that off. But
no, it really doesn't like floating unburned fuel particles.
No.
Because that's what sets a lot of things off. This is a Pentecost, and it was the first fire piece I think I did. No, I lied. There were other fire pieces, but this was within a year or so of the other things that I started making fire with. And I like the combination of fire with material, of the temporary and the solid. A lot of the materials I use are really sturdy. So if something ephemeral happens at the same time, I think it's an interesting contrast. But the Pentecost is when God came down and the Holy Ghost came down, descended on the apostles so that they could speak to everybody. And one of the ways in early painting that you see it is you see these 12 guys sitting around a room with little flames sticking out of their heads like so many birthday candles. So a lot of the things I steal from those strange attempts at making a picture of something that doesn't exist. So I steal those things. And so this has 12 little flames, including the one that in the annealer, or in the pouring of the glass over the copper, this particular one bent through, so I call it my Judas flame. Yeah. So it does work, but I had to do a little workaround to get to it. And I love prosthetics like that. That little move makes me happy, and I think the piece is a lot more interesting for having it.
Yeah.
So if something has a fix or a workaround or a prosthesis, I'm pretty happy about that. But the biggest example of this is into the burning bush, the not consumed piece, which really has a lot of flame on it when it's allowed to go.
And this is a piece that was made at Kohler as well?
That was made at my second residency at Kohler. And this does light up quite nicely with its handy kind of hardware store barbecue tank.
I love that it's got its propane tank on a leash.
Yeah. Well, you don't really want it too close to the action for
No.
a variety of reasons. But, the aesthetic of using the bottom of an office chair for the wheels and then using a hardware store propane tank, I like all the guts to show all the marks of how it was made.
Yeah. Well, I love even how you've left all of this hardware on the exterior of the piece as opposed to trying to hide it within it, or it really celebrates. It's very honest. It's very direct.
Yeah, and to me it actually works like a kind of a gas vein system on the outside.
Yeah, totally.
So that's something that pleases me aesthetically. But yeah, I wish I could light it. I certainly got asked an awful lot, like, when is it gonna get lit up?
I know.
I said, when it leaves this building.
Maybe we need to do a ceremonial lighting in the alley.
Oh, that ought to bring them out, yeah. Good idea.
One of the other themes that I've seen in your work is the sort of use of this kind of scaffolding. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you think about that?
Yeah, scaffolding is complicated. I use it in a variety of ways. One is sort of goes back to that notion of a prosthesis, that it's holding something up that doesn't hold its own self up. The piece she's filming now is the head of Job's wife. In this case, the scaffolding is this overwhelming whirl of expectation and structure that's outside of her control and actually suspends her in this. Poor Job's wife gets like 2 lines. All his friends get chapters and chapters of whinging and moaning and being wrong. She gets 2 lines and he shuts her down. Like, shut up, wife. So this scaffolding is used to stand in for a larger structure that is beyond the control of the thing that's in there. I like a wacky scaffolding. I like an overwhelming scaffolding, where the thing being supported and the support have equal visual weight. So some of my scaffolds are more organized, like this piece here. This they begin to do, and it's the entire text describing the Tower of Babel story, every letter in porcelain from bottom to top in very heavy little stacks. And in this case, the structure, the scaffold, is more like a museum mounting. It holds these artifacts in place. And I also like scaffolding for its ability to change the gravity situation of any given thing.
Yeah, well said.
Because making things that look sacred or holy in base, heavy, clunky materials is one of those things I find to be a really beautiful part of the human endeavor. Like if I go to a church, and the last time I saw this beautiful little painting, but the surround for the painting was an entire wall of gilded clouds and ooky Baroque stuff. And there was a really nice 14th century painting in the middle of that, but you could hardly see it. So the things that humans do to make something look sacred or special are really interesting to me. And it all requires engineering.
Right.
So I'm just bringing the engineering into view.
How about the suitcase piece here?
So this is one of a series of suitcases I did. And it was called Bearing the Body. And it comes from I did the whole Passion cycle at a show in this gallery. And this is Bearing the Body of Christ. So the surprise is when you pick it up, this is fiberglass on the outside, but it's lined in lead. It's actually quite a hefty item. So I wanted there to be some sort of interest in the action of picking it up, so that you don't necessarily get what you think you're getting when you pick this thing up. And there were 4 of them, all variations. And that was left from my sort of factory time, where I would make things in series and figure out how to kind of work different directions within the same series. Do you want me to open it up?
Sure. Can you?
Yeah.
Do you want an extra set of hands?
No. Okay. That's pretty easy.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So he's kind of like lead-lined checked luggage. What I wish I'd done when I first made them is actually, walk around, shoot a video with them. And now I'm considerably less interested in videos of myself walking around. But at the time, I was younger and cuter and would have liked it more. But they actually work pretty well. And
That's
if you
cool.
walk around the street, you'd get a lot of questions.
You get a lot of questions, I imagine.
Yeah. And they're all interesting questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I've really taken away from this exhibition is how much conversation it starts.
Yeah.
Each piece is the beginning of a conversation.
Right.
And that has been really, I mean, we've only had the show up for 5 days or something now,
Right.
and already the number of conversations that I've engaged with the people who've come in to see this exhibition is really remarkable. And I think it's a testament to your work and the way that you don't answer questions for people.
I hope none of these pieces are
Like
the end
it's
of a
always
conversation.
exactly.
Yeah.
It always is the beginning of a dialogue,
Right.
even though it may be a dialogue that's been going on for centuries.
Right.
In some capacity, you continue the conversation.
In the best of all possible worlds, the work just sparks something. And it sparks something kind of deep, and maybe something that doesn't come up a lot.
Yeah.
Not just a kind of a surface reaction. So that's, I think, the most an artist can hope for, is that it works for people who see it. I mean, I'm not here most of the time explaining stuff. The work's got to do it for itself.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works better than others. But I like a good question.
Yeah, I think the use of history, materials, meaning, language, all of those things are inextricable in your work, and it's just remarkably successful. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's really a pleasure to have the work in the gallery, and I'm excited to see where these conversations continue to go for the next month.
Right.
And I would invite all of you to come in and see the work in person and explore it and engage with it, because it's so layered and so impactful. And
Well, thank you.
Congratulations on a beautiful show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I should also mention that we published a really beautiful book with this exhibition. I'm just going to grab a copy here so you guys can see it. And if folks are interested in getting one of these, it's a wonderful book that has beautiful images of the work in the show, but also a really thoughtful conversation with Lauren about the work and the inspiration and the history
with the
of
fabulous Peter Gauchis.
Exactly. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in, and Lauren, thank you so much for taking us on a tour of the exhibition, and
My
congratulations.
pleasure. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
Not all
My-
galleries would take this sort of thing on.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Bye.